When I was in college, I rented a cheap two-bedroom house with my friend Mark just outside of town. It was the kind of place students took because it was all they could afford, old, slightly run down, but quiet and isolated enough to throw weekend parties without bothering neighbors. The weird part was the backyard. Beyond the overgrown fence was another small house, maybe 50 feet away. It looked abandoned, windows boarded up, yard overrun with weeds, roof sagging on one side. We joked about it being haunted, but only half-heartedly. No one really talked about it. Until one night, about a month after we moved in, when Mark came home pale and jittery. He said someone had been watching him from that house. Not just standing in the yard, watching from behind the boards like they'd made a slit in one and were staring straight through it. He swore it wasn't a trick of the light. Said he saw the glint of an eye. I didn't believe Mark at first. I figured maybe he saw a raccoon or something. We were close to the woods after all. But that night, around 2 a.m., I was up studying at the kitchen table. The window overlooked the backyard and, beyond it, that same abandoned house. Out of habit, I glanced up. There was definitely someone there. I couldn't see a full face, but the shape of a head, part of a cheek, was pressed right up against a gap in the boards. It wasn't moving, just staring. I didn't know how long they'd been there. I stood up slowly, trying not to draw attention, and reached for my phone to call the cops. As soon as I moved, the figure backed away and disappeared into the darkness inside. The police came 15 minutes later. They shined their lights on the place, checked the perimeter, and shrugged. Told us no footprints, no sign anyone had broken in. They said it was probably a squatter and left it at that. We didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Mark and I decided to check the place out ourselves. We hopped the fence and crossed the yard, cautiously approaching the old house. Up close, it was worse than we thought. Rotting wood, broken gutters, and a heavy smell of mold even from outside. The front door was padlocked. Windows were boarded tight. But we found a small basement window that had been busted out, just big enough to crawl through. Mark was hesitant, but I went first. Inside, it was freezing and damp. Dust everywhere. The basement was empty except for a few broken chairs and a rusted water heater. But what stood out was the smell, something sharp and metallic, like blood or rust. It made my stomach turn. We climbed the stairs and found the main floor mostly gutted. Wallpaper peeling off. Holes in the floorboards. Everything coated in grime. But at the end of the hall was a door that didn't match the others, newer, reinforced, with a deadbolt. We looked at each other. No reason for that kind of door in a place like this. We didn't have tools to open it, so we left. But before we climbed back out, Mark snapped a photo of the door. That night, we heard scratching. Faint but steady, like fingernails on wood, and it was coming from our backyard fence. We turned off all the lights and watched from the kitchen window. At first, we didn't see anything, but after a few minutes, something moved along the fence line. It wasn't an animal. Too tall. It looked like a man, hunched low, slowly dragging his hand across the wooden boards as he walked. He kept glancing toward our house, pausing every few steps. Then he stopped, and just stood there. We didn't move, didn't speak. I don't think either of us even breathed. After what felt like forever, he crouched almost on all fours and crawled back toward the boarded house. Disappeared into the trees. We called the cops again. This time, they said the old house was condemned. No one was supposed to be in there. But they wouldn't send anyone out unless the guy was actually on our property. So the next day, we bought motion lights and set them up around the yard. Put a cheap security cam facing the fence, just in case. 2 nights later, the lights went off around 3 a.m. And when we checked the footage, we saw him, standing at the edge of our yard, just outside the light's reach, staring straight into the camera. He didn't move for over 7 minutes. The next morning, we took the footage to the police. They gave us the same speech: no real threat, can't act unless he's on our property. One officer finally admitted something that made our stomachs drop. The old house had a history. Years ago, a man had been squatting there. When they finally removed him, they found he'd built a hidden room behind one of the walls. Soundproofed, reinforced. They never said what was inside, only that it was sealed up and condemned right after. We decided we weren't waiting around anymore. We borrowed a crowbar from a friend and went back through the basement window that night. We made it to the door, the one at the end of the hall. Mark's hands were shaking as he pried the frame. It popped open easier than expected. The room was small, maybe 6 feet by 6. The walls were lined with old, yellow foam insulation and plywood. A single chair, a bucket, chains bolted to the floor, and in the corner a pile of photographs. Dozens of them. Some were just of the backyard, like surveillance shots taken from inside the house. Others were of us, Mark getting out of his car, me smoking on the porch, even one of us asleep in the living room through our front window. They weren't old photos. They were recent. We grabbed the photos and ran. Called the police from the driveway. This time, they took it seriously. They sealed off the house, sent in a full team. But here's the part that never made sense. The room was empty when they arrived. No chair, no chains, no photos. Just a bare, dusty space behind that reinforced door. They questioned us for hours, even took our security footage. We never got it back. Eventually, they told us someone must have been using the house again, maybe watching us from inside for weeks. But they never found him. No prints, no name, nothing. We moved out 3 days later. Mark doesn't talk about it anymore. And I still have one of the photos hidden in a box in storage, one the cops didn't take. It's the shot of me through the window, asleep on the couch. And in the reflection of the glass behind me, there's a shape standing in the hallway. One we never saw. In 2019, I was working night shifts for a delivery service in a quiet suburb outside Denver. Most nights were uneventful, just groceries, takeout, or the occasional sketchy envelope drop-off. I drove a beat-up Corolla and listened to podcasts to stay awake. One night, around 11:45 p.m., I got a delivery to a house on a dead-end street. It was the last stop of the night. When I pulled up, the house was dark, no lights, no porch lamp, nothing. I double-checked the address. It was right. I parked in the driveway and got out, figuring I'd just knock. As I walked up, I noticed the front door was cracked open. Not wide, just enough that it caught your eye. I paused, groceries in hand. Then the porch light flicked on. It wasn't motion activated. Someone inside had flipped the switch. I stood there, unsure what to do. The light was on, the door slightly open, but no one had come out or said anything. I called out delivery and waited. After a few seconds, the door creaked open a little more and a man stepped into the doorway. He looked wrong. Not in a horror movie way, just like someone who wasn't expecting company. He wore pajama pants and a sweatshirt, barefoot, but what stuck with me was how blank his expression was. Like he had no idea why I was there. He didn't say a word, just stared at me. Then, after an awkward moment, he nodded slowly and stepped aside. I didn't want to go in, but it was late and I figured maybe he was just tired or high or something. So I set the groceries just inside the door, mumbled something like, "Have a good night," and turned to leave. Then he spoke right as I stepped off the porch.
"She used to bring them in, too."
I stopped. "What?" He repeated it quieter.
"She used to bring them in, too."
I didn't say anything. I just kept walking to the car, trying not to look shaken. I got in, started the engine, and checked the rearview mirror. The man was still on the porch, staring at me. Still not blinking. As I backed out of the driveway, something caught my eye, a faint light in the basement window of the house. It hadn't been on when I arrived. It was flickering like a bulb on its last legs. I didn't stop, just kept driving. That line he said she used to bring them in kept replaying in my head the whole way home. The next day, I mentioned the whole thing to a coworker during a break. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Was it the place on Wintergreen Lane? Dead end, red mailbox?" I nodded. He got real quiet. "That house has been empty since last year," he said. "Guy who lived there, he killed his wife. Said she used to bring strangers in off the street. Delivery guys, handymen. Claimed she was feeding them to something in the basement." I didn't sleep that night. I kept going over the details in my head, the man, the way he stood there like he was waiting, what he said. The basement light. And now this? That the house was supposed to be empty? The next morning, I called our dispatch office and asked to confirm the order from the night before. Gave them the address and time. After a pause, the guy on the phone said there's no record of a delivery to that location. Not last night. Not all week. I asked him to double check. He did. Nothing. Then he asked me quietly, "Did someone give you that address over the radio?" I said no, I got it through the app like normal. He went silent for a few seconds, then asked, "You still have the receipt on your phone?" I checked. It was gone. Not archived, gone. No sign I'd ever been sent to that address. But I remembered it clearly, including the GPS navigation. I even remembered the name listed on the order, Katie M. That's when it hit me, Katie. The guy's wife. The one who'd supposedly brought people in. I couldn't let it go. Something about the whole thing felt unfinished. I needed to know if what my coworker said was true. So the next night after my shift, I drove back to that street. When I turned onto the cul-de-sac, I slowed down. The house was dark again, no porch light, no basement glow. Totally dead. I parked down the block and walked up quietly. No cars in the driveway. No sound. I stepped onto the porch, heart racing, and noticed the door was shut this time. I circled around to the side yard where the basement windows were. One of them had a sliver of space where the curtain didn't quite reach. I got low and looked in. The room was lit by a single bare bulb, a chair, a small table, and on the floor, a large plastic bin. Sitting next to it was a phone, my phone, the one I'd used for work, the one that supposedly had no record of that delivery. I reached for my own pocket out of reflex, just to be sure. My phone was still there, and it was turned off. I backed away from the window, heart pounding. There was no way that was my phone. It looked identical, same scratches on the case, same sticker on the back. But I was holding mine. That one. I never put it there. I didn't wait around. I jogged back to the car and drove straight home. Didn't sleep. Next morning, I went to the police. They sent someone to check the property. I wasn't allowed to go with them, but an officer called me later that afternoon. He said the house was empty. No furniture. No lights. No plastic bin. No phone. And then he added, by the way, that house has been padlocked for over a year. The owners live out of state. No one's supposed to be going in or out. I didn't return to that neighborhood again. But a week later, I got a new work phone. Same model. Same login. And as I was setting it up, a notification popped up for an old photo backup. I opened it. It was a picture taken from inside a basement. Dim light. A chair. A phone on the table. And standing behind it all, barely visible in the corner, was me. In 2022, I took a short-term sublet in Chicago while I was between leases. It was a one-bedroom apartment in an older brick building, creaky floors, radiator heat, thin walls. The guy who owned it was traveling for work and needed someone to stay there for 2 months. Rent was cheap, the place was clean, and it was in a safe part of town. The only odd thing was the front door. The deadbolt worked fine, but the door itself had 3 extra chain locks, all installed at slightly different heights, like someone had added a new one every few years. The guy never mentioned them when we met. Just handed me the keys, showed me how to work the radiator, and left. That first night, I locked the deadbolt and one of the chains out of habit. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a soft click. It came from the front door. At first, I thought it was just the building settling. Old places make noise. But then I heard it again. A slow, careful sound like someone testing the lock. I got up, heart racing, and walked barefoot to the living room. I didn't turn on any lights. Just peeked through the peephole. No one was there. Still, I slid on the second and third chain locks. Then I sat on the couch and waited. Nothing else happened that night. The next morning, I messaged the guy who owned the apartment and casually asked about the chains. He responded with,
"Oh, yeah. Probably should have mentioned those. Just a precaution. Sometimes the building has issues."
When I asked what he meant by issues, he didn't respond. That night, I locked everything again. But around the same time, 2:03 a.m., I heard the chains rattle. Not just a click this time. A slow, dragging pull like someone was trying each one from the outside. The next day, I bought a cheap door camera, the kind that sticks above the peephole and records movement. I figured I'd catch some bored neighbor messing around or a drunk trying the wrong door. That night, I set it up, locked everything, and left the living room light on. Just in case. 2:04 a.m. this time. I heard the rattle again. The door shifted slightly like pressure was being applied, not enough to break it, but enough to make the hinges groan. I didn't go to the door this time. Just waited until it stopped. In the morning, I checked the footage. It showed the hallway empty. The whole time. No one approached, no shadows, no movement. Just the door handle twitching every so slightly on its own, and then the chains swaying like something had tried to open them. The timestamp lined up exactly with what I heard. I started asking around the building. Most of the other tenants were older people who'd lived there for years. One woman on the second floor, Mrs. Holler, stopped me in the stairwell and said, "You're in 3B, right?" I nodded. She sighed. "That unit's always been strange. Every tenant hears it, always around 2 in the morning. But it only happens when someone's living alone in there." I asked her if anyone had ever figured out what it was. She shook her head and said, "The guy before you? Left after 10 days. Didn't even ask for his deposit back. Said someone was trying to get in every night." Then she added something that chilled me. "They never break the door. They just test it, like they're waiting for someone to forget." That night, I double-checked every lock. I even wedged a chair under the handle. At 2:01 a.m., the door handle turned. Not slowly this time. It jerked hard like someone thought it would open. I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed the landlord's number. No answer. I left a message telling him I'd be calling the cops if this kept happening. I sat there in the dark for an hour, holding the phone, trying not to think about the door. Then, just before 3 a.m., I felt it. A cold draft. Like someone had opened a window in the apartment. It was sudden, chilling, sharp against my skin. I checked the windows. All closed. But as I walked back toward the hallway, I noticed something. The door was slightly ajar. Not much, but just enough for someone to have pushed it open a few inches. The chains were still locked, but the gap in the door was real. I didn't even think. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the stairs. As I rushed down to the front door, I saw a figure in the corner of the lobby. It was just a silhouette, but I knew what it was. I felt it. The figure didn't move, didn't even acknowledge me. It just stood there. I ran out the building, straight into the cold night. My heart was racing, and my breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. I didn't look back as I walked to the nearest coffee shop where I sat, trying to calm down, trying to figure out what was happening. The next morning, I packed up my things and called the landlord again. This time, he picked up. "I was just about to call you," he said. "There's been a mix-up. 3B wasn't supposed to be listed. We had someone leave in a hurry a few months ago. The police came by a couple of times. There was a disturbance." He paused before continuing. "They said it was nothing, but no one else has stayed in that unit since. I couldn't stay there any longer." I handed in the keys and left. A few days later, I checked the rental listing for the building online. 3B was up again. No mention of the previous tenant or the police. I clicked the contact link and it redirected me to a blank page. I never went back to that part of Chicago. And I still can't shake the feeling that someone's standing just on the other side of my door every night, waiting for me to forget. In early 2021, I had to take a work trip to a small town in rural Wyoming. It was for a week-long project, a simple consultation job. The company booked me into a charming little motel just outside the town center. The place had good reviews online. Clean, comfortable, quiet. Perfect for a solo traveler. When I arrived, the clerk at the front desk was an older woman with gray hair and a soft smile. She gave me the key, told me the Wi-Fi code, and added, "If you need anything, feel free to ask. We don't get many guests this time of year, but you'll be safe here." I thanked her and headed to my room. The motel had that old, nostalgic vibe. Bright wallpaper, worn carpet, and a faint smell of pine. Nothing out of the ordinary, just quiet. But there was one thing I noticed right away. No one else was staying there. Not a single car in the parking lot, just mine. I figured it was because it was off-season. Still, it was a bit unsettling. That first night, I settled in, unpacked, and worked on my laptop. The town was small, and my work didn't require much interaction with locals, so I stayed in the room most of the time. Around 10 p.m., I started hearing faint knocks on the door. It was a light knock, almost like someone was tapping gently with their knuckles. Not enough to be alarming, but it was repetitive, like they were waiting for me to answer. I looked through the peephole, but no one was there. I assumed it was just the wind, maybe shifting the wood or something. So I went back to work. But then, a few minutes later, it happened again. This time it was louder, more deliberate. I opened the door this time. No one was in the hall. Just empty, silent rooms. Confused, I locked the door and went to bed. The next morning, I shrugged off the knocks. Maybe it was a neighbor or just an odd creak in the building. I went about my day working on the project in the town and not thinking much of it. That night though, the knocking started again. I was expecting it this time, but it was louder than before. I hesitated, then looked through the peephole. I didn't see anyone. I got up, unlocked the door, and stepped into the hallway. It was completely still. No one else seemed to be around. The building felt completely empty. But as I turned to head back to my room, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow flickering just at the end of the hall. I froze. It wasn't the shape of a person, but something more fluid, almost like a shifting, uneven shadow moving along the walls. I quickly stepped back into my room and shut the door. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was just the light or maybe my eyes playing tricks on me. But then came another knock. Just one. And then silence. The next morning, I asked the clerk about the knocks. She just smiled and said, "Oh, sometimes the walls make noise at night. Older buildings, you know." I nodded, still unsettled, and decided to let it go. But that night, the knocks came back, this time even louder. I sat up in bed, trying to ignore the growing feeling that something wasn't right. Then, as the knocking stopped, I noticed something odd. The furniture in my room had shifted. The chair by the desk was facing the wall instead of the window, and the bed's covers were folded in a way I hadn't left them. I was certain I had left everything the same as I had in the morning. In fact, I distinctly remembered pushing the chair closer to the desk and straightening the bedspread earlier that day. But now everything was off. I thought maybe someone had entered while I was out. I checked the window to see if it was unlocked. Nothing out of place. The door was still locked. But the longer I stood there, the more it felt like someone had been there, in my room, watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling. The following day, I decided to investigate. I checked the room thoroughly, looking for any sign that someone had been in while I was gone. I found nothing. No fingerprints on the window, no marks on the door. It was like the room had rearranged itself overnight, just for me. That night, the knocking came again. 3 sharp raps on the door. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my phone and called the clerk. She answered after a few rings, sounding half asleep. "Is there anyone else staying here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She paused for a long moment. "You're the only guest, Han. Why?" I don't know. It feels like someone's been in my room. The furniture's moving when I'm not here." She let out a tired sigh. "I'm sure it's just your imagination. The place has its quirks, but nothing more. Just get some rest, okay?" I hung up and sat on the bed, feeling more alone than ever. The knocks had stopped, but the uneasy feeling lingered. As I walked into the bathroom to wash up, I noticed something on the bathroom mirror. A small, folded piece of paper stuck to the glass. I took it down carefully. The note simply read, "Leave now." No name, no explanation, just those words. I felt my hands go cold as I stared at the note. The writing was neat, precise, but it wasn't my handwriting. I checked the door again, locked and bolted, then turned to the window. It was shut tight, no sign anyone had gotten in. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me the entire time. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I packed my things and decided to leave early in the morning. The clerk wasn't at the front desk when I went to check out, which was odd. I left the keys on the counter and walked out, trying not to look back. When I reached my car, I glanced up at the motel. It was still dark and I couldn't see any movement through the windows. But as I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror, and there, standing in the window of my room, was a figure. A silhouette staring out at me. It was too far away to make out any features, but I felt certain it was someone or something that had been in my room all along. I haven't been back to that town since.